Perfect. All right. Welcome everyone to Balancing Power Between Community Members and Land Reuse Practitioners. We're really excited for you to be joining us all here today to talk about this important topic. We've got a lot to cover, so I'm going to jump right in. Couple introductions for those of you who aren't familiar with us. My name is Claire Weston. I'm the program director at the Center for Creative Land Recycling. Our mission is to promote the sustainable, equitable, and responsible reuse of underutilized and environmentally impacted properties. We are US EPA's Technical Assistance to Brownfields Provider, or TAB provider, for EPA Regions 9 and 10, and also serve as a key partner under Groundwork USA's nonprofit for brownfields cooperative agreement with EPA, in which and under which we serve many brownfield communities nationally. So that's what kind of brings us to you today, is our collaboration with Groundwork USA. So both Groundwork and CClear, we aim to meet you where you're at in your redevelopment process and help you every step of the way. So that means working with you one-on-one and in group TA opportunities, everything from brownfield identification and prioritization to coordinating with federal, state, and local content experts, identifying funding opportunities, you name it, we're going to help you at each step of the process. So our partners at Groundwork USA, Groundwork USA is a national nonprofit that supports and strengthens grassroots efforts to build healthier, more resilient neighborhoods. They do this by working deeply with their network of place-based affiliates and by facilitating national peer-to-peer learning, technical assistance, and grant-making programs for community-centered organizations nationwide. Our speakers today include yours truly. Again, I'm Claire Weston. I'm the program director at the Center for Creative Land Recycling. I'm joined today by my colleague Norman Wright, a senior planning and design consultant with CClear, and Bees Zhang, who is a project manager at the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust. So here's what we're looking at for our content today. So I'm going to start with a bit of intro and framing, and I'm going to take you through some power mapping and introduce you to the fulcrum concept. Norm is going to go over some activities, strategies, and tools for success. And then Bees is going to conclude us with the nonprofit perspective. Okay. So jumping right in, we want to define the challenge. Why are we talking about what we're talking about today? So brownfield redevelopment and land reuse, as many of you might be aware because you've worked in the industry for a while, or you've worked with community members or clients that are involved in the industry, it can be quite complicated and a rather drawn out process. Right? I mean, part of brownfield redevelopment is the number of questions, the number of unknowns involved. Is the site contaminated? If it is contaminated, what is the nature and extent of that contamination? How does that affect risk? How does that affect liability? How does that affect cost of the redevelopment? So these are all questions that have to be asked and explored in a brownfield redevelopment process. So it makes it often more difficult to redevelopment on brownfield properties versus virgin land, or what we term greenfields. And with this complexity comes longer timelines and more stakeholders. So when you are navigating these complexities, proper community engagement can sometimes fall by the wayside because your mind's going in a million different directions, right? But if not properly engaged in the reuse process, community members can feel that they are uninformed of decisions that are made and how those decisions may affect them. They may feel that their contributions and insights have been overlooked, that their priorities have been sidelined. They may feel blindsided by site cleanup or development actions, and ultimately can end up feeling ineffectual in their ability to contribute to an initiative or project that may have a very real impact on their lives. And what we see sometimes is that these feelings can lead to distrust between community members and government and city officials. They can result in costly misunderstandings, spur conflict, and ultimately contribute to project delays and resident displacement. So the question is, how do we address this challenge? How do we mitigate these issues? How do we ensure that community members not only have ample opportunities to participate in the redevelopment process, but can do so effectively? That's really the key part here. So there are a number of ways to engage with the community. And that's actually not really what this webinar is about. Today, we are going to focus on the unique role that nonprofits and community groups can play. So the argument we aim to make is that the nonprofit and community group land reuse leaders are sort of uniquely positioned to play the role of balancing the power so that community members are better equipped and empowered to not just weigh in on brownfield redevelopment decisions, but initiate or lead them. So that said, our goals for this session include understand the fulcrum concept. That's what we're going to get into right now. Number 2, discover practical strategies for bridging the gap between community needs and decision-making authorities. And 3, learn how to equip your communities with the tools and knowledge to make their voices heard throughout the redevelopment process. So to illustrate the fulcrum concept, we are going to consider 2 factors that we'll use to categorize different types of stakeholders that are likely to be involved in or impacted by a land reuse project. These 2 factors are influence and impact, where influence is effectively decision-making power. How much influence do they have over the initiation or direction of a project? And impact, to what degree will they be impacted by the redevelopment or reuse, both in terms of how they may benefit and how they may be negatively affected. Big shout out to Moe and Jaleesa at Groundwork USA. This next set of slides and the power mapping exercise that we're going to do together were developed as part of Groundwork USA's nonprofit land reuse learning cohort series. So some of you may recognize some of these materials if you were part of that. We can plot these 2 factors, influence and impact, as 2 spectrums on a grid. So here's what that power map grid looks like. On the y-axis, going from top to bottom of the grid, you have level of influence. On the x-axis, going from left to right across the grid, is how much the stakeholder may be impacted by the project. So stakeholder engagement power mapping is useful for a number of reasons. First, and most relevant to the content of today's webinar, it can help you understand dynamics. So identifying who holds power and who is most affected. It can also help you plan engagement strategies, thereby informing outreach and partnership approaches. And it can promote equity by identifying and thereby recognizing and empowering underrepresented stakeholders. So we're going to get a chance to do some of this stakeholder plotting. So Rebecca, if we can have that link popped into the chat with the directions. If you want to go ahead and click on that Miro link, that's going to take you to what's called a Miro board, and you will find there this grid, this power mapping grid. So I'm not going to follow you to the Miro board. I'm going to continue with my slides, but what I'm saying is still going to make total sense to you if you're looking at the Miro board as you plot some stakeholders, because what we're trying to get you to do is think a little bit about this and plot some of those stakeholders based on your unique situation. So that said, couple things to note about the power mapping exercise and plotting the stakeholders on the grid. The goal is to guide your thinking, not create a finished product. So there is no right answers. Your interpretation really depends on your situation. So if you've plotted your city council person in the upper left-hand quadrant, but another attendee has plotted their council person in the upper right-hand quadrant, that's completely reasonable. Both quadrant locations can be right. Someone's city council person might live in the neighborhood where a site is actively being redeveloped. So they are definitely impacted by that project, right? So both scenarios can be right. It is dependent on your unique situation. So let's do a couple examples. Again, it's totally fine if you're in the Miro board. What about the mayor? So the mayor is the mayor. So the mayor might have a bit more influence. So we're going to plot them sort of towards the top. Depending on where the mayor lives, they might be less impacted upon. So in this fictitious example, I have plotted the mayor towards the left. So they end up in the upper left-hand corner of that upper left-hand quadrant. Let's try another example, another stakeholder type, neighborhood youth. So neighborhood youth depending on where they live, can be significantly impacted by a project. If they ride their bikes home from school and they pass the project that's being actively worked on, if they live in the area, if they play in the area, they are going to benefit from a reuse or be affected by an improper reuse, right? So I plotted them further on the right, but oftentimes they do have less influence in land use decisions. So that's where I've ultimately plotted them. So how does this stakeholder power mapping relate to our fulcrum concept? So if you're still viewing the mural board, come on back to the slide deck, and we're going to talk about it. So a fulcrum, as I've stated here, is the point at which a bar or something that is balancing is supported or balances. That's the physics definition anyway, but I promise it's relevant. So do you remember this title slide? That was an Easter egg, right? So here's an example of where we've plotted some of the stakeholders. These are some common stakeholder types that, again, I've plotted just as an example. So if we look at these stakeholder types and where I've plotted them, and we envision drawing a line directly underneath them, I imagine this is starting to look familiar to you. So we're going to talk today about the role of the blue dot. So the blue dot, the fulcrum, the second definition of fulcrum is the main thing or person needed to support something or to make it work or happen. And so really the punchline, if you will, to my introductory spiel here is the fulcrum is the role of the nonprofit or community group, or it is a role that the nonprofit or community group can fulfill in this land reuse process. And that's what my colleague Norm is really going to dig into in this next session. So I'm going to hand it over to him at this time.
Okay, thank you, Claire, and thank you all for joining us today. As we get started, I'm going to share the screen here, pop up the next section of our presentation, and this is that part where we're going to talk about those activities and strategies and tools for success. As we do this, I want to give a little bit of introduction for myself here. I'm a consultant. But before becoming a consultant, I spent 18 years in local government, and that was time that I spent in, in a lot of rooms like this one right here. This is, a city council chambers that you might see. Again, it could be a city, it could be a county, it's a local government where those decisions are made by those with influence in ways that can affect those who are going to have more of the impact, though they have less influence. In those 18 years in local government, I've been a planning director, a director for community development, economic development. I've overseen libraries, stormwater utilities, an animal shelter. I've done this work from a county of 500,000 people in South Carolina, a city of 50,000 people in Tennessee, a county of 500,000 in Denver, in the Denver area of Colorado, and then a city in Oregon of 180,000 people, Salem, Oregon. Lot of lot of cases, lot of issues, a lot of community needs that go to meetings in rooms like the one on the screen. And the most effective ways that I have seen communities really tilt that balance back has been with a nonprofit helping them like that fulcrum that Claire's describing, and doing so in ways that are pretty novel, pretty unique. A lot of times we get a lot of advocacy and negotiation and concerns that come to these council meetings, but when a nonprofit is really effective, I have found that they've done these things in a very procedural way that actually fits well within the processes that a city uses to make their decisions. And so everyone who occupies that lower right-hand quadrant, who are more impacted by an issue but have less influence, the nonprofits who are the best, really again bring them up to the center with a process that I'm going to detail partially through a scenario here. So let's imagine a scenario where there is a lot, a piece of property within a city of 50,000 people, not too big, not too small, And in this city, there's been a community-wide assessment that's been completed. So an assessment grant from the EPA. They've looked at several potential brownfields, and this one property is a 3-acre brownfield that's owned by the city that's rumored to be listed for sale soon. This is in a city that's transforming right now into a bedroom community. They used to be a standalone economy, a standalone city, but as growth has occurred in the region, they're now entering that gravitational well of the larger metro, and they're becoming a moon that orbits the planet, if you will, and it's changing their economy, and it's leaving some people behind. So this is a really important thing because this kind of story helps illustrate why this one 3-acre property is so important to a community. Local businesses are starting to struggle in this area as these changes occur, and non-professional services are starting to decline in terms of their demand. And all of this is occurring for people who happen to live in the area where this one 3-acre brownfield is up for potential sale. 75% of the community is unaffected by these issues, it seems, but this one other 25%, that lower right-hand quadrant, they very much have the most impact and the least influence. And so, in this scenario, which I've seen pretty regularly, at least in a variety of land use situations, we also have a city hall perspective that's worth considering. So as the economy's shifting here and as things are starting to change, the city itself is seeing that its tax revenue is starting to flatten. And so the city wants to sell this property to raise funds for some one-time capital improvements. And they hope that this can stimulate the local business economy too, in that area where the community will be affected. So they've done their phase one assessment. They've found that there's no contamination on this site, which is a very good thing. But they also consider the property a nuisance, and many members of the community do too. This is a site where there's been illegal dumping, tall grass, which is a fire hazard during certain parts of the year. There's a lot of loitering that's occurred, and there's even been some homeless encampments that have been found on this site. And so, as rumors start to build in the community about this property, the nonprofit hears about the issue. And then the nonprofit, they've got some kind of connection. Maybe it's through a meeting, through a local civic club. They see the mayor, they talk to the mayor, and they validate that this rumor is indeed true, that the city's thinking about selling this property. And so once that's validated, the nonprofit does something that I think every nonprofit knows to do. They start to notify residents, gather them together, and hold a meeting. And this is fantastic. This is the sort of thing that I wish our cities and counties would do more of themselves, but we often have to rely on a nonprofit to help us do this as well. And so here's where things start to differentiate. When a nonprofit is really effective, I have found that they don't just bring people together to talk about the issue, they introduce them to a process for addressing that issue. And this is where this fulcrum concept, I think, really starts to crystallize. That process almost always, I have found, and speaking generally, follows 4 basic steps. Those steps are shown on the screen here, is to get clear about the issues, get focused on the priorities around those issues, get moving on actions to address those priorities, then deliver those actions consistently through whatever process is underway with the city as it exercises its power and considers all influences in making a decision. So this 4-step process, it's pretty straightforward, and we start here with step 1 of getting clear, and then we're going to move on to getting focused. And in each one of these steps, the fulcrum or the nonprofit starts with step 1 to help both sides, the city and the community, develop information. In step 2, they then make sure that both sides get together to share that information. Then they help the community start to prioritize their needs, build their agenda around that exchange. And then in step 3, they're working together to negotiate and advocate the community for what they want to see out of this process until finally in step 4, they start to deliver those things again through an active participation in all aspects of what the city does to make their decisions. So this to me is straightforward, and the reason I say that is because this is how every local government also procedurally addresses issues. They develop the information, they get focused, and they go through this process too. So when nonprofits see that and understand that and know how to do that for their communities, they start to intertwine some of the things that a city has to do themselves in a way that helps the city and helps the community do it together. And I really think that's great. And the reason why this is such an important thing, this 4-step process, is that when I see, in my experience, groups be less influential and less effective, unfortunately, it is due to the fact that in most cases, when a community group hears about an issue, they typically jump straight to steps 3 and 4. We typically see that there's a lot of very heartfelt advocacy, there's some strong negotiation, but it actually comes before there's a lot of the clarity that a city or a county needs and the focus that they need to help them get on the same page with that group. And so this 4-step process, I think, is essential. And again, the best nonprofits, I saw them do this before I even knew what this process was. And so I'm going to just cover the first 2 steps here in this scenario to try to walk through what I have seen, again, as a blend of these case studies elsewhere. Okay. Step 1 is getting clear about the issues that you want to help that community address. And when I talk about information at the top of this screen, and we talk about balancing power, it's important to remember that especially with local governments, information is power. It's delightful to see that when people get the right information and can present it the right way, the city, the county, they accommodate. They always have, at least in my experience. And so some of that information can be, what you see on the screen here, an infographic with some data and some charts. But there's actually several types of information that are needed. And it's going to seem overwhelming at first, but I want to share all of this because this is what your cities and counties are looking for as well. First is the property itself, the property that's being listed for sale. That's its site boundaries, its conditions, its zoning, the process that it's in for consideration. These are some technical bits of information that are specific to each one of the cases or issues you're dealing with. There's also information about the people. At the start of this scenario, I talked about how there's an economy that's shifting here. Well, oftentimes that gets reflected in the socioeconomic information you see on the screen here, whether it's educational attainment or age or income or other components that help to measure and tell the story about that lower 25%, lower in the sense of their position within the power map, but certainly not lower in any other means. And to help see how they're facing a situation that's pretty dire, sometimes the socioeconomic information can help. And then there's information about the area. And this is where the real story about what people are facing in a particular situation where they lack influence can really shift. And when I say the area, I mean the area that surrounds the property and a comparative analysis of that area compared to other parts of town. I'll get to that in a second. It's a lot of information, but the good news is that in most places, particularly of the size we're describing here, the stuff that's highlighted in bold here are things that the city can and often wants to help provide to every group so that they can all have it. And so the city would be the group here that would provide that information in bold, and the community would be the group through the fulcrum or the nonprofit to provide the information that the city might not otherwise see about the area. So there's a situation, a potential sale of a lot. And that lot, if it's sold, could be reused in ways that could really impact what is an otherwise not very influential group that needs help. The nonprofit gets with that group, helps them see a process in which they can gain more influence and gain more effect, and they talk about this information to collect. And then the next step is the fulcrum, the nonprofit, and any community volunteers that can, they go meet with the city. Now, what's so important here to stress is that you actually meet with the city, meet them face to face. The city has hundreds of cases a year. This is but one of them. And the more you can have face time with that staff, the better. And the staff want to have that face time. Again, in my experience, the best place to start is with the city planning department. And depending on the size of the jurisdiction, there's usually a city planner or a planning associate who's going to be assigned to that area. And you want to start there first. And that's for every issue. They might not be the people to solve an issue, but they can redirect you very effectively if it needs to go to something else, like, say, your parks department or public works. So it's always good to start here because these people are really able to help at least get you on the right foot, if not actually help you all the way through a process. And in this case, they're gonna be the partner to help again tilt the balance here throughout this entire scenario. So the fulcrum and the volunteers, they meet with the staff and they share with the staff everything they're doing, the whole process. We're getting information. We need information from you all. We're going to provide you information too. And in this meeting, a very important thing is however you can, try to help the staff or allow the staff to guide this information gathering effort with the things that they can provide, whether that's online resources through GIS mapping online or socioeconomic data. There's also staff services where they might, and in this case, they will provide a report. And then there's the actual process, understanding that process and what everyone's going to be going through as they deal with this issue. These are all things that can be discussed at that first meeting face to face, and it's very, very helpful to just continue to ask these questions. As the questions get asked, the fulcrum and the volunteers learn that the city planning department does in fact have an active case and an active process underway. The property is going to be sold, that's the plan, but in order to sell it and make it marketable, there has to be a rezoning. Now, rezoning is just basically to change the designation for the allowed uses on that property. It's a little technical for some people, but the staff are there to help explain the whole detail of what that means. And in particular, that there's going to be public hearings starting in about 2 months. This turns out to be a great thing because 2 months might not seem like a lot of time, but for real influence to be built, it's plenty of time. Believe me, it's plenty of time so long as you do the right things. And so that means working backwards from a 2 month time frame. There needs to be public comments submitted to the staff within 6 weeks. Okay. And that means information needs to be developed within 4 weeks or a month. Okay, fine. And the city, to try to help, they're going to get their staff together to develop a report for the community, for the nonprofit, within about 3 weeks. They won't have socioeconomic data available for this, but they'll have everything else regarding the property. And so check back in 3 weeks, they say. The fulcrum, the nonprofit, they know they get leverage, that this is great, but they also, before leaving, ask for one more thing. They ask for another meeting. Actually, they asked for 2 meetings because this is like the core technique I can most full-heartedly recommend for building influence. The fulcrum asks to put that 3 week time frame on the calendar so that they don't just email the report, but they provide it in person and they meet and they talk about it together face to face. And in preparation for the rest of the process ahead, getting clear, then getting focused, the fulcrum also asks that the city staff please be a part of a community meeting within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Up until that point, when public comments are due, there's plenty of time there with a month's advance notice to put a community meeting on the calendar. Most staffs I know across the, well, they would be willing and able to do that. And so all of this is to also keep communication going, not just with them, but also with the council representative. And all of this is part of this first meeting. So it's about talking about what information can be collected, how they're going to share it, how they're going to meet and talk it through within 3 weeks, and then also have a community meeting about it within the next 4 to 6 weeks. This feels like a lot, but I think a lot of staff would really appreciate having that kind of structure and see ways in which they can contribute. And there's a point to all of this. See, I think that the best nonprofits I've seen, when they serve this fulcrum role, they have an agenda. And that agenda is to create these meetings, these exchanges between the community and the city in order to consistently generate new information. Repeated meetings and a regular stream of new information from both sides increases the understanding. And when you deliver that through a predictable schedule, we're going to have a meeting here, then we're going to have a meeting there, then we're going to have this meeting, then we're going to have the public hearing for a city and a city staff, and then later for those with influence who are on the elected body, this builds momentum and trust. And it helps to also, of course, keep that council representative informed throughout the process. Some will want to be fully engaged, some will want to be on the periphery. But again, what really matters here is that all these meetings and this conversation, it builds this momentum. And the best nonprofits I've ever seen, they do this very well. So once that's done, the fulcrum, the nonprofit, they go back to the community and they say, hey, we had this great meeting with the city. We're going to have a community meeting with them in about 4 to 6 weeks. Let's set that up. And then also for that meeting, they're developing information for us. We need to develop information for them. And so with that, the fulcrum starts to solicit volunteers to gather information. Information here, again, we've shown some data, some charts, etc. But really, what matters most is that this information be truly new. And there's a surefire way to do this. It's super easy. So if you don't have socioeconomic data, that's okay. If you don't have other kinds of data, that's fine. Novelty matters more, and simplicity above all when it comes to creating meaningful, influential data for the issues your community is facing. And so a lot of times when thinking about, gathering information, we talk about, hey, walking tours, brownfield inventories, and that stuff is great. And oftentimes we develop that information for the community itself, and that's good too. But this information has another audience, and again, it's the city. And for the city, I think what really matters the most, and this can be again a county too, local governments, what they really need is perspective. And so if you're going to do these tours and these inventories, don't just do it for the communities surrounding area. Do it for the other parts of town too. Let me get clear. What the cities and counties, the local governments want to see is a clear picture of disparities. When a group has low influence and high impact, and there are environmental justice issues that have been going on for a while, and there's good parts of town and bad parts of town. Everybody can kind of get a sense of that and a sympathy for it, but nothing carries more influence than to actually put it to photos or to video or to surveys. Again, the data. This is new data that actually validates that experience in a way that can be very meaningful. So what the nonprofit, the Fulcrum, can do in this case is work with the community to not just get photos of their street, but get photos of the nicer parts or the nicer streets on whatever other side of town that exists, and get surveys and information about their service experience with all the public services compared to, again, other parts of town. All that kind of data is highly influential because nobody on any council I've ever known can confront that and not start to change their mind and their picture and their perspective on how to handle any given case. And so examples of great information, take photos of the area infrastructure. Do you have sidewalks? Great. Take photos of those compared to other parts of town where maybe their sidewalks are nicer and newer. Or maybe there's missing services, like there's a library on one part of town, but not in this part. Get surveys, 10 questions on SurveyMonkey for free, or maybe it's a paper survey that you pass around at the nearby church. There's all kinds of ways to do this, but in every case, I think it takes about 1 to 2 days, maybe three, to get like videos of the traffic conditions, the photos, the surveys, this kind of stuff. And of course, you can do a full-blown brownfield inventory, or you can do something that's somewhere in between that's 4 to 8 weeks. But some of this stuff is really, really readily available and can quickly build a case for you and your community, I think, in a way that's very effective. So in our scenario, the Fulcrum helps the community do this with the following. They take photos of the area's sidewalks, the lighting, the streets. They also take the same photos of the nicer parts of town. And while this may not seem like it relates directly to a land sale, believe me, it does. They also start to conduct opinion surveys on what people think is needed in the community, whether that's for new services or new uses like what could occupy this site. And then they also take videos of the traffic conditions. Now, when they do all this, the community is getting clear. They're getting clear on the issues that they've always felt and known, but now they can actually demonstrate. And they see, for example, that sidewalks and lighting are very poor in their neighborhood compared to other parts of town. They also find through those surveys that people want to see a community space, ideally a library branch, but maybe it's just a third place of some other kind. They also want a grocery store, and people want pickleball courts all across the country, it seems. That's what people want. So we're going to throw that in the scenario here. And they also find out that traffic really isn't that bad. So, okay, traffic's not as much of an issue as they thought, but bike lanes are needed. Okay, within all of this, we've gotten really clear on the situation, on the issues, and now it's time to get focused. And this is where I'm going to wrap things up. But as I do, I want to show that this is a very feasible possibility, this kind of process within an 8-week time frame, but it can be for 10 years. This can be an ongoing conversation and a process that gets repeated and refreshed with every issue that comes up. But there's a theme here, getting clear, providing new data, talking about those issues with that data in hand to demonstrate those problems, and giving it to the decision makers so that they see things that they otherwise don't get a chance to view through any of the typical process that is utilized. And so, again, step two, you share that information with the city, with the staff at first, and later with the decision makers, and you prioritize the needs that emerge from everything that you're learning together. Sharing that information means that community meeting. I want to stress this really importantly. I really strongly encourage that everyone avoid town hall formats when you're having a community meeting with city staff. It gets too adversarial too fast. If you can do something like in this picture where you have a large table or a circle where everyone's gathered around, that's so much more collaborative naturally. And this is about sharing information. So the city shares their information from what they've developed over the last 3 weeks. The community shares their information of all the photos and the surveys. They even include the stuff that they've decided is not an issue to help show the process that they have taken. And then they discuss those next steps towards prioritization and coordinated public comment. Now, I'm going to wrap this up pretty quickly, but as I do, um, that community meeting, again, what's helpful is that the community builds understanding about the process ahead with the rezoning in this case, the public comment period where they can have an impact, and the space within that process for making adjustments. Maybe these things are already known, but if so, it bears repeating at every community meeting that you have, because this can get lost very quickly as people start to really focus on what they want to advocate for. And then the city, meanwhile, they get to learn through this process, this community meeting, the community's concerns and needs, the data that they've shown to validate that in a way that's very influential and meaningful. And they get to get a sense of the likely comments that they're going to receive. And the more they see that coming, the more they can think about it, start to internalize it, and anticipate ways to help. And again, every place I've worked, the more they see that ahead of time, the more this is transparent and is an exchange, the more influential it becomes. So finally, the fulcrum helps the community then prioritize. They sort all those concerns that they've shared. They write it all down into a simple ordered list. They validate each of them with that data that they've collected together. And if you don't prioritize those things, the city will. And so I'm going to show you what that looks like in this particular scenario. In this scenario, the fulcrum helps the community decide the following priorities. They build their agenda on these things. They say they want streets and sidewalks and tasteful pedestrian street lighting, just like they see in the other parts of town. So if you're going to sell this property, do so in a way so that there can at least be a development that starts to provide these things and starts the process of getting more of this in our community. They also ask for a civic space on this site because they can do that. They can ideally get a library branch, or maybe they work around a public-private partnership for a multi-purpose space. That's a mouthful, but there's ways to see how that can be a part of a potential project in the future. They also want a grocery store if they sell a piece of this property, but they'll also settle for a community garden, anything to address the food desert issues they're facing. And then also they would love bike lanes. That's really important. Pickleball would be nice as a fifth priority. And then, hey, as a sixth priority, maybe some affordable housing. These are the kind of priorities that, again, when this gets listed out in any shape or form, it is powerful. And if it gets to provided in a report for the city, whether it's for a land use case or later for a budget hearing or later for uh, potential election and candidate debates, the more this gets shared in a report, which is the way that cities and counties digest this information, the better it is. And so the fulcrum helps them write their report. They don't wait for the city or the county to write a report. They write their own. It's very simple. It's their concerns about this property, their needs, the way that the data validates those needs, and then that priority list of requests, all within the context of the process that's underway. And city staff help them to shape this up correctly, where maybe something can fit right now, something's got to be put in later. But these reports, the more they come from the community, the more powerful it is. It's really amazing. And so, I want to wrap up by again showing this four-step process. We're only talking about steps one and two. Steps three and four are the things that I think most people are very familiar with when they engage with their community and try to bring things to their decision makers. So we won't go into that. There's a lot more that can be shared through our nonprofit partner that's going to speak next. But when they get to the get moving part, when they get to the negotiating and advocating, they have this report. They have this data, they have this language, they have this process that again builds a lot of influence. And I think this is where I've seen those power dynamics really shift to right. And it's really great. It's really great. I've been so impressed with those who've done this very well. In conclusion, a fulcrum doesn't put themselves on one side or the other in a process like I'm describing because the center is where the leverage is. And so they position themselves in the center between the two groups and help. When the fulcrum helps, it's to help the community increase its contact face to face with those in power, whether it's the decision makers or the city staff who are going to really be the ones who guide this process. The fulcrum makes sure that both sides share information for one another. And then the fulcrum helps the community increase influence in the best way by addressing issues with the data that they can collect with their eyes and ears and with their surveys and their opinions and clear priorities and a regular presence. When that's done regularly, it creates lasting influence. This is for a 6-week process. It could be for a 10-year process. The key is that this kind of approach, I think, really does create meaningful change in every case that I've seen it work successfully. And so with that in mind, there's a lot more to say there, but it's better to see it in action from those who do it very well. And so I'm going to turn it over now to our friends at the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust to go through the rest of the presentation here. So Bees, it's all you. I'm going to stop sharing the screen.
Bees, would you like to share your slides yourself, or would you like me to share them and then you can say next slide? It's up to you.
Why don't you share them? Thank
I'll
you.
share them? Okay, yeah, sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Claire and Norman, for teeing us up. And thanks everyone for being here. Thanks for inviting us into this space. I'm going to share a little bit about us and then a case study of one of our key projects that we're working on right now. And it's always fun being brought in as a case study when I'm learning so much about how you're presenting all of this. So we'll be taking away a lot of lessons from this. And as I present, I was just thinking to myself that there are kind of our community partner sort of served as our fulcrum earlier in the project, and then we took on that role as the project took more shape. And so kind of just seeding that in your minds right now and see if that makes sense, and then we can discuss anything that I've missed or anything that we need more follow-up on. But that was just a quick little teaser that came to mind as you were speaking, Norman. So hi again, everyone. I'm Bee Zhang. I'm a project manager with the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust. Our mission is health and justice through community parks and community gardens. In the last couple decades, we've been very privileged and humbled to have helped create 30 community parks and gardens, comprising 22 acres of public green space across the county of Los Angeles, which if you're not from the area, is 88 different cities, encompassing or being home to over 10 million people. So being able to serve 500,000 of those directly through the parks and gardens that we're rooted in is a huge honor and pleasure all of the time. We operate under 3 core pillars: community engagement and advocacy, and that kind of looks like pushing for park equity measures and funding. We do park and garden stewardship across the spaces that we own and steward and maintain, and as well as programming those spaces with culturally specific, health, wellness, cultural programs. And then we also do park design and development, and that's kind of where this work happens. We can go to the next slide. So this project we are calling the Jefferson Park and Affordable Housing Project. It's located in South Los Angeles, about 0.3 miles away from University of Southern California's campus. And since the 1960s, it had been an active oil drilling site. And this is a site that, as I kind of mentioned, our community partner, Redeemer Community Partnership, which I'll speak more about in a moment, really stewarded an advocacy and organizing campaign to shut down the site, which was successful in 2018 into 2019. And then in 2023, LA Neighborhood Land Trust, we were able to successfully complete the acquisition of the site. It's just under 2 acres. The next slide. And this is a photo from 2022, so a year before we finalized acquisition. So as you can see, the nearest bedroom window to this active oil drilling site, up until 2018, 2019, is just 3 feet away. This is not a reality in other parts of Los Angeles or other parts of the country, but is a reality for a lot of folks in South LA. And this is a neighborhood where, for many decades, since the 60s, kids and elders and community members in general have documented and experienced nosebleeds, asthma, migraines, different kinds of cancers, even miscarriages, for a very long time, kind of understanding that it may be related, but having almost no information coming out of the oil operator, which was had changed hands a couple of times. By the end, it was Sentinel Peak Resources. So there was no advance notice about different kinds of activities that were happening in the oil extraction process. As those of you who are familiar with the history of oil might know, this is way after the boom, right, in Southern California. So a lot of what was happening on this site was injecting different cocktails of chemicals into the wells to break up the geology to access what oil remains. And that was part of, when we think about the scale and the span of the contamination that was happening to that, there's so many different kinds of impacts amongst all of those different kinds of activities that were happening. There was also, sort of trucks coming in and out of this site, sometimes spraying neighbors' landscaping that would then die, or we've even had a couple of neighbors who themselves were sprayed with an unknown chemical with no recourse. So that's just sort of the setup to sort of where we are. So when you're thinking about the power mapping that you all did earlier in the session, I think, in our case, that was sort of top, on that left top quadrant for us. was this oil operator and the lack of transparency there and the very, very tangible harm that was being inflicted. So the next slide here is a little bit of just kind of then clarifying further for us who some of the players are besides us. So as I mentioned, Redeemer Community Partnership is based in South Los Angeles in this area, West Adams Exposition Park, near to USC, where there is a lot of gentrification displacement pressure to the largely non-white communities that have made this place their home. Within that work, we also work very closely with a coalition called Stand Together Against Neighborhood Drilling Los Angeles. In terms of, the fulcrum model, I'll mention that as we moved toward the acquisition process, we actually stepped back from the coalition. And this is maybe to your point, Norman, about remaining in the center, right? So we actually stopped. We like kind of step back and put away any of the collaboration that we were doing for the period of the acquisition in order to maintain that central role. And then Neighborhood Housing Services of LA County has sort of been on deck to help us support with the affordable housing piece that I'll speak about a bit later. In terms of public partners, this has been a role that we've found ourselves quite a fit for. So we were able to leverage relationships that we had with Assemblymember Reggie Jones Sawyer of District 57 in California to help acquire a state budget allocation to complete the acquisition. And that was a $10 million publicly funded acquisition. We've also done the grant writing and fundraising from California State Parks for $5.8 million to develop the park. And what the stage that we're in currently is remediation planning through the Department of Toxic Substances Control. And some of the technical assistance support that we have been working closely with CClear on is thinking about, well, what does affordable housing really mean? So we can talk more about that as well. But if we go to the next slide, I'm going to just kind of, having set the stage, walk us through sort of how we got there. So this is, again, a photo of the site and thinking about the role of Redeemer Community Partnership. They really were doing a lot of kind of workforce development, thinking about overall displacement pressures, and working very closely on, neighborhood-specific issues. So they are a nonprofit since the 90s that has been working in this community. What they, when they started becoming this fulcrum, I would say, using that model, was really around 2013 when Sentinel Peak Resources applied for additional permitting to create more wells. So that sort of opened up, it gave us an access point into what's happening on the site. So Redeemer Community Partnership, RCP, was able to gather information, hear the lived experiences of the folks in the neighborhood, take those experiences, take those photographs, to conduct those walking tours and take that to the city. So they were able to create to prevent the expansion, actually, applying pressure to the city to reject the permit, to not permit new wells from being drilled. And that was in 2014. In 2016, they were able to successfully give testimony against the site in total as well. And so if we go to the next slide, I'll just quickly give a little more information about what the site really is. So typically when we talk about oil sites, and these contaminated sites, they're often legacies that we are now dealing with in newer development or in redevelopment. In this case, in the 1960s, these were people's homes and businesses. So along Jefferson Boulevard, those were commercial businesses, and then there were 8 additional lots that were residential. So the oil operators at the time, Union Oil, they actually bought all of these lots and demolished them and did this. Obviously, this was prior to the formation of the Environmental Protection Agency. So these were activities and actions that were slipping under the radar of any regulation. if we go to the next slide, I like to include this because a lot of people haven't seen an image like this before. The circle, the map on the right shows our site, and then the map on the left is a related oil site that's still active actually. So ours is shut down, the other, and we acquired it. The other one is still active, and this shows the footprint of the pathways of the wells. So they don't just go straight down, but they actually kind of go at angles to access different areas of the geology below. And so when we talk about a parcel or a property or a lot, it's a helpful reminder to think about how sometimes these words and definitions fail to capture the full extent of a footprint of a lot itself. Next slide, please. And I think this is a great example of, these are photos taken by the organizers and community members assembled by Redeemer Community Partnership to do precisely one of the actions that was recommended a few minutes ago, to sort of look at the kinds of differences between similar drill sites in West Los Angeles versus South Los Angeles. So what we're seeing in West LA near Beverly Hills is that there actually is a lot of oil drilling happening there currently as well. Los Angeles is the largest urban oil field in the country. And what we see is that those sites are fully electrified. So that means that there are not additional emissions using fuel, burning fuel, that are creating more additional spot pollution, right? They're also protected with sound and kind of air and any capture of fumes to protect the residents there. Next slide, please. And that's not what we see. And again, the images on the right are both images of our site on Jefferson Boulevard. So, back to the narrative here, 2016, Redeemer Community Partnership and the community members organizing were able to give testimony to the city of LA about on the topic of nuisance abatement. Okay, so basically comparing the way the city has regulated and exercised the environmental regulations in other parts of their jurisdiction, but not in ours. And that was actually successful. So the community was able to win health protections. Sentinel Peak Resources in 2018 appealed that ruling. They lost it, and they began a lawsuit. And so Redeemer Community Partnership again kind of played this role with us supporting to assemble pro bono environmental lawyers. And this is kind of starting to become a turning point where LA Neighborhood Land Trust became more involved from our standpoint. So Redeemer Community Partnership doing a lot of the strength of the organizing work, LA Neighborhood Land Trust having our own community organizers, but not being immediately based in this neighborhood. We started taking on more and more of a role as things like lawsuits came up, and then eventually the site closure in 2019. So if you go to the next slide, all of this kind of work culminated in the oil operator, Sentinel Peak Resources, deciding actually it would cost us less in the long run. It would be a better business decision for us to just simply leave. And that was a fantastic outcome for this community and all of the environmental organizing and community organizing that had happened. So Sentinel Peak Resources reconsidered this site as stranded assets. They began a process of well abandonment with the city. And that was when we stepped fully into the role as a fulcrum from there as LA Neighborhood Land Trust to carry forth the acquisition process. So we represented the community, and this is where I mentioned we stepped back from her role in some of the coalition spaces purposefully in order to go through the due diligence process and negotiation with Sentinel Peak Resources with the funds that we had raised in the meantime. Okay, next slide, please. And, you know, when as this was happening, there were other developers who wanted to purchase the site, and there was a lot of lack of clarity about exactly what might happen now that the community had won the shutdown of this nuisance that had been polluting and contaminating these communities for many decades. And so what we knew needed to happen was together, as LANLT and RCP, we conducted a series of community visioning sessions in 2019 to 2020. And the purpose of those visioning sessions was to ensure that there was a really rigorous and clear vision from this community about what should happen on the site, and that it was not going to be dictated to them by an outside developer. And what these folks resoundingly shared with us was three things. It was housing, and again, that piece is sort of needs to be dialed in. What do we, at what level of affordability are we talking? How many units? What kind of ownership structures are all really good questions to keep clarifying. So housing, a community space for gathering, and then also a community park. So we were able to ramp up our acquisition efforts and sort of kind of outstayed the competition basically at a certain point. It is a contaminated site. A lot of folks didn't think it was worth sticking around for. And then if next slide, please, and I'm wrapping up in a second, I promise, is the phase that we're in now, which is remediation planning. So this is what the site looks like now, and that's that house that I showed you at the beginning that was facing this oil site directly outside its bedroom window. And the remediation planning right now, if we go to the next slide, should support the strategies that are necessary for site cleanup. So we're sort of, as we were working on acquisition, we did community visioning. And as we're doing cleanup now, LANLT together with RCP, we're going to start site planning and design as well. And I'm actually working on a grant for site planning and design right now today as one of my other things I'm doing today. So hoping to get into construction in 2 years or so and start to have this reparative action for this community that, for which it's really long overdue. So next slide, please. I will just end there because I don't know if I went over time or if I'm under time, but I would love to hear questions and discussions and hear what folks thought or things that I missed or answer any questions. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Bees. We are a little bit of overtime, but y'all are hanging with us and we appreciate that. So let me get to where I can see the questions. Bees mentioned creating a park. I just wanted to give a shout out for the next webinar that's coming up, which I think many of you will be interested in. It's Let's Create a Park, Building Creative Funding Strategies for Park Development. That's on November 18th. We'll put the registration link in the chat. And I'm going to leave this up for a second, and I'm actually going to close my window here and see what we've got for questions. We are over time, but I think if Norm and Bees are willing, maybe we can just go over a little bit. Rebecca, is that okay with you? Just like 5 minutes? Let's see what we've got for questions. Okay, go ahead and stop sharing. Okay. Too many screens to keep track of. You know how it goes. All right, let's see what we've got here in the questions bank. All right, so there was a question asked about if some of the work that Norm mentioned related to putting together their demographics information and putting together a report is the type of technical assistance that CClear and Groundwork USA can support. That is the kind of thing that we can support. So you just want to contact us through our intake form, and we can point you in the right direction. We can support you in gathering that information, where we can show you where to find it. It's all very much in our scope of work. Have you secured funds to complete the next phase? I bet that question is for you, Bees.
Yes and no. So we secured a state parks grant for $5.8 million to support the construction but we are seeking funds to fund the design phase. So it's sort of like a little bit of a puzzle all the time. And I do think that's a role that is really we find useful to fill because it can quickly become very overwhelming if you don't have kind of an organizational um, team that has like the familiarity with this kind of thing. So it's something that we're working on actively, and all of the remediation is funded as well. So we're just sort of trying to like thread the needle with the little bits of the gaps that we have here.
Yeah, and I think it's an important thing to know. In Norm's hypothetical, he presented a timeline, which is a rather idealistic timeline, in especially in the case of brownfields redevelopment. And I think we can all say in this group that you will hit some bumps in the road with brownfield redevelopment. Bees can definitely attest to that. And so expecting those hurdles, taking a beat, finding creative ways to overcome those hurdles, and just recognizing that these processes can take a very, very long time. And just the fulcrum role, one of the big things that the fulcrum will do is just stick with it. Because community members, they have lives and concerns, and it might be hard for them to focus on it. And so the fulcrum can really be that grounding entity that keeps everybody focused on progress, even when things start to feel a little sluggish. Looks like we don't really have any other questions from anybody. If you do have questions for us, feel free to email us. You will get these materials, the webinar recording, the slide deck, and our follow-up information. So our emails and all of our speaker information. You're welcome to contact us. We can go in further depth in any of these topics that you felt you need more information on. Happy to help in any way. And then if you want to set up a meeting with us, we can also do that and dig into any questions that you might have. So thanks for sticking with us. I know we're a little over time. Thank you, Bees and Norman, for your insights and for helping us really articulate this concept of the fulcrum role. We really appreciate it, and I hope everyone has a great day. And please be in touch, and we'll be in touch with some follow-up materials. All right.